My name is Lillian. I'm 32 years old and work as a pediatric nurse in Boston. I grew up in what seemed like the perfect suburban family, loving parents, holiday traditions, and a special bond with my Uncle James, who was like a second father to me. But beneath that perfect surface lurked a betrayal that would shatter everything I believed about family loyalty. What happens when the people who should protect you choose to protect a secret instead? If you're watching this video, drop a comment telling me where you're from, hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I learned the painful truth that sometimes standing alone is better than standing with people who silence you. I grew up in a beautiful colonial house in suburban Massachusetts, with neatly trimmed hedges and a tire swing that my father hung from the massive oak tree in our backyard. Our neighborhood was the kind where people left their doors unlocked and children played outside until the streetlights came on. My parents, Thomas and Margaret, were fixtures in the community. Dad was an accountant for a prestigious firm and Mom taught piano lessons from our living room. But the center of my childhood universe was my Uncle James, my father's brother. He lived just 20 minutes away and was at every birthday, every holiday, every important moment. Uncle James was everything my strict father wasn't: spontaneous, funny, and incredibly attentive. While Dad was often buried in work papers, Uncle James would spend hours playing board games with me or teaching me to skip stones across the lake behind his house. "Lillian, you've got the perfect technique," he'd say, watching my stones bounce 4 or 5 times across the water's surface. "You're a natural." Those simple words made me feel special in a way my parents' expectations never could. My parents raised me and my younger sister Kate with high expectations and an almost obsessive focus on our family's reputation. "A Williams never shows weakness in public," my father would remind us before social gatherings. "Family matters stay within these walls." This mantra was repeated so often it became as familiar as a nursery rhyme. Growing up in this stable environment shaped me into a naturally trusting person. Why wouldn't I trust? My world was predictable, safe, and secure. Every Sunday meant dinner at Grandma's house. Every summer meant 2 weeks at the lake house in New Hampshire. Every Christmas Eve, Uncle James would dress as Santa even long after Kate and I had outgrown the myth. I remember the exact moment I decided to become a nurse. I was 14 and my grandfather had fallen ill with pneumonia. The home health nurse who came to check on him daily was so gentle and compassionate. I watched her work with such precision and care, making my terrified grandmother feel at ease. "You have healing hands," she told me when she caught me watching. That comment planted a seed that would eventually grow into my career. But looking back, I can now see that my childhood wasn't as perfect as it seemed. There were moments, small fractures in the facade, that I was too young to recognize as warning signs. Like how the adults would sometimes abruptly change the subject when certain topics came up. Or how my mother would squeeze my father's arm under the dinner table when Uncle James said something inappropriate. Kate, 3 years younger than me, always seemed to sense these undercurrents better than I did. "Why does everyone get weird when Uncle James is late?" she asked me once after a family barbecue. I dismissed her concerns. "You're imagining things," I told her. Kate had always been the more rebellious one, questioning family rules I accepted without thought. Then there were Uncle James's funny moods, as my mother called them. Days when he'd be uncharacteristically quiet or jittery. Times when he'd cancel plans at the last minute with vague excuses. I accepted the explanations without question, because that's what we did in our family. We didn't pry. We didn't question. We maintained the illusion of perfection. I was 10 when I first overheard my parents arguing about Uncle James. I'd come downstairs for a glass of water and froze in the hallway when I heard their raised voices coming from the kitchen. "He promised it wouldn't happen again, Margaret," my father was saying, his voice strained. "That's what he said last time, Thomas," my mother replied. "And the time before that. When is enough enough? He's my brother. And these are your children. What happens when Lillian or Kate notices?" Their voices dropped then, and I crept back upstairs confused but somehow knowing I shouldn't ask about what I'd heard. It was the first time I sensed that there were things in our family that weren't to be discussed. the first hint that our perfect family had secrets buried beneath its polished surface. By the time I turned 16, I had started noticing subtle changes in Uncle James's behavior at family gatherings. The man who had once been the life of the party now often arrived late, sometimes with bloodshot eyes, or a slight slur to his words that everyone pretended not to notice. He'd become unpredictable, excessively cheerful one moment and irritable the next. But whenever I tried to catch my parents' eyes during these episodes, they would quickly look away or change the subject. The first concrete incident I couldn't ignore happened during my junior year of high school. I had been saving for college since I was 13. Babysitting money, birthday checks, summer job earnings, all carefully deposited into an account my parents had set up. When the time came to pay for my AP exam fees, my mother took me to the bank only to discover that nearly $2,000 was missing from my account. I watched my mother's face drain of color as the bank teller explained the withdrawal had been made last Tuesday. "There must be some mistake," she said firmly, but I could see her hands trembling. Within days, the money was mysteriously replaced. When I asked my father about it, he dismissed my questions with unusual sharpness. "It was a bank error that's been fixed," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Let's not discuss it further." But a week later, I overheard another argument, this time between my father and Uncle James in the garage. I couldn't make out all the words, but phrases like, "last time," "get help," and "the girl's money" filtered through the door. When they emerged, both men wore forced smiles that didn't reach their eyes, and dinner that night was unnaturally quiet. When I finally gathered the courage to directly ask about Uncle James, the response was immediate and unified. "He's going through a tough time," my mother said, her smile tight. "Everyone struggles sometimes, Lillian. Family stands by family." "But what kind of tough time?" I pressed. "Is he sick? Is something wrong?" "Enough questions," my father cut in. "Your uncle's business is his own. Our job is to support him, not gossip about him." That summer, I grew closer to my cousin Ryan, Uncle James's son. 2 years older than me, Ryan had always been more distant from the family, often missing gatherings with excuses about work or school. During a rare visit to our house for a 4th of July barbecue, I found him alone on the back porch, watching Uncle James with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You've noticed, haven't you?" Ryan asked quietly when I sat beside him. My heart raced. "Noticed what?" Ryan's laugh was bitter. "That my dad isn't just having tough times or bad days. That's what they all say, right? What's really going on?" I whispered, both wanting and dreading the answer. Ryan hesitated, watching his father laughing too loudly at something my dad had said. "Pills mostly," he finally said. "Started after his back injury 3 years ago. Then alcohol to help with the side effects. Now it's both, and probably more that I don't know about." I shook my head, instantly defensive. "No, that can't be right. Uncle James wouldn't. He's just stressed from work. That's what Mom says." "Yeah," Ryan said, standing up. "That's what everyone says." I didn't want to believe him. Uncle James was my hero, the adult who actually saw me as a person rather than an extension of the family name. Ryan had to be exaggerating, misinterpreting, maybe even lying out of some resentment toward his father. As the months passed, though, it became harder to maintain my denial. There was the Thanksgiving dinner where Uncle James disappeared for nearly an hour and returned with a strange energy, talking rapidly and knocking over a wine glass. There was the Christmas where he gave everyone wildly expensive gifts despite having mentioned business troubles earlier that year. There was the time he forgot my birthday entirely, something the old Uncle James would never have done. Tensions grew between me and my parents as I became less willing to participate in the family pretense. "You're being disloyal," my mother accused, after I refused to cover for Uncle James when he showed up 2 hours late to my high school graduation party. "I'm being honest," I countered. "Why can't any of you just be honest about what's happening to him? Family loyalty is more important than your teenage concept of honesty," my father said coldly. "You'll understand when you're older." Only Kate seemed to share my frustration. "It's like we're all actors in some weird play," she said one night as we lay in our shared bedroom. "Everyone has a script except us. I just don't understand why they won't get him help if he needs it," I told her. Kate, wise beyond her 13 years, sighed. "Because getting help means admitting there's a problem. And admitting there's a problem means the Williams family isn't perfect after all." The breaking point of this phase came during a holiday dinner when Uncle James arrived visibly intoxicated. His movements were uncoordinated, his speech slurred. When he nearly fell while carrying a dish to the table, my father caught his arm with practiced ease, a movement so smooth and familiar it could only have been performed many times before. I watched in disbelief as everyone continued as if nothing unusual was happening. My grandparents chatted about their Florida condo. My aunt discussed her garden club. My parents expertly steered conversations away from Uncle James's condition. Even Ryan, who had confided in me, now sat in resigned silence. In that moment, I realized that the problem wasn't just Uncle James. It was all of us, an entire family system built around protecting secrets rather than people. And for the first time, I wondered what other truths might be hidden beneath our picture-perfect family surface. By the time I was 25, I had completed nursing school and was working at Boston Children's Hospital. My education had given me something the rest of my family lacked: the ability to recognize the signs of addiction and understand its devastating effects. What once might have looked like funny moods or tough times now appeared to me as classic symptoms of substance abuse. During a weekend visit to check on my grandfather's beach property during the off-season, I found Uncle James's car parked haphazardly in the driveway. Confused, the property was supposed to be empty. I used my key to enter and called out his name. When there was no answer, a sense of dread filled me as I searched the rooms. I found him on the bathroom floor, barely breathing, his skin a frightening shade of blue. My nursing training kicked in immediately, checking his pulse, positioning him properly, calling 911. When I spotted the prescription bottle and half-empty liquor fifth on the counter, the reality I had suspected for years was confirmed in the most terrifying way possible. The emergency room was a blur of activity. I answered questions about what I'd found while a team worked on my unconscious uncle. When the doctor finally approached me, her expression was grave but unsurprised. "Your uncle is stable, but this was a close call," she said. "The toxicology report shows dangerous levels of oxycodone and alcohol. Has he had problems with substance abuse before?" Before I could answer, my parents burst through the hospital doors, my mother immediately pulling me into a tight hug, while my father spoke quietly but intensely to the doctor. I watched as the doctor's professional demeanor shifted into confusion as my father emphasized our family's privacy and discretion. After Uncle James was moved to a private room, my father gathered our immediate family in the hospital waiting area. His voice was low but firm. "What happened today stays within this family. James had a bad reaction to his medication. That's our story and we're sticking to it." "But Dad," I protested, "the doctor said he needs substance abuse treatment. This wasn't just a bad reaction." "Lillian," my mother cut in sharply, "your father knows what's best. Treatment centers and programs would just create gossip. We can help James ourselves as a family the way we always have. The way we always have." Those words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't the first time. Of course it wasn't. Later that evening, as Uncle James slept in his hospital room, I confronted my mother in the hallway. "How long has this been going on? How many times has something like this happened before?" My mother's carefully maintained composure cracked just slightly, age and worry suddenly visible in the lines around her eyes. "It started after his divorce when you were about 8, she admitted. "Pills for his back pain, then anxiety medication. There have been incidents over the years, but we've always managed to keep it contained." "Contained?" I repeated, incredulous. "He almost died today." "Lower your voice," she hissed, glancing around though the hallway was empty. "Your father and I have been protecting this family for years. Do you have any idea what this would do to your grandparents? To the family name? To your father's business connections? If word got out?" I stared at her, finally understanding. So all those times growing up, the missed events, the mood swings, the money from my account, it was all because of his addiction. She winced at the word addiction, but didn't deny it. Your father couldn't turn his back on his brother. What would you have had us do? Get him help, I exclaimed. Real help, not just covering up and making excuses. My mother's expression hardened. You're still young, Lillian. There's more at stake here than you understand. After Uncle James was discharged, I tried to talk to Ryan about getting his father into treatment. We met at a coffee shop near the hospital, but it was immediately clear that Ryan had been living with this reality far longer than I had. I've tried, Lil, he said wearily. I've researched programs, staged my own interventions, even threatened to cut contact. Nothing works because he always has a safety net. Your dad, your grandparents, everyone who keeps protecting him from consequences. But he could have died, I insisted. Ryan looked at me with eyes much older than his 27 years. Trust me, this wasn't the first time. Probably won't be the last either. As I drove home that night, painful realizations washed over me. My entire childhood had been shaped around my uncle's addiction. The family rules about privacy, the emphasis on appearances, the subtle tensions I'd never understood, all of it had been part of an elaborate system to enable Uncle James while maintaining the illusion of the perfect family. What hurt most was recognizing that my parents had prioritized this system over their children's well-being. They had allowed money to be taken from my account. They had exposed us to an unstable environment while gaslighting us about what we were seeing. They had trained us to value family reputation over truth and health. For the first time, I began to question everything about the family I had once trusted implicitly. And I wondered how many more painful truths were hidden behind the Williams family's perfect facade. 3 months after the overdose incident, our family was preparing for a major reunion to celebrate my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. Relatives from across the country would be gathering at a rented lake house for a week-long celebration. Under normal circumstances, I would have been excited for the event, but now all I felt was a growing sense of dread. In the days leading up to the reunion, I noticed concerning signs in Uncle James's behavior. During a family dinner to finalize reunion plans, he arrived an hour late, pupils constricted despite the dim restaurant lighting. He kept excusing himself to the bathroom, returning each time with renewed energy and a light sheen of sweat despite the air conditioning. No one said a word. What pushed me over the edge was what I discovered the next day. While helping my mother organize some financial documents for the anniversary gift, a family trip to Ireland, I came across a series of checks written to Uncle James over the past year. Large amounts annotated vaguely as business investment or loan. What are these? I asked, spreading the carbon copies on the kitchen table. My mother snatched them away quickly. That's between your father and James. It doesn't concern you. It concerns me if you're financing his addiction. I said the words hanging heavy in the air between us. We're helping him through a difficult time, she countered, her voice brittle. That's what family does. No, I said, finding a courage I hadn't known I possessed. Helping would be getting him into rehab, not giving him money that's probably going straight to dealers or liquor stores. The argument that followed was ugly. Words like disloyal, ungrateful, and naive were thrown at me while I countered with enabling ban, denial, and addiction. We reached no resolution, only a tense ceasefire, as my mother reminded me about the importance of showing a united front at the upcoming reunion. But something had shifted inside me. After years of watching this destructive pattern, after nearly losing my uncle to an overdose, after seeing my family continue to choose denial over health, I knew I couldn't remain silent any longer. I spent the next few days researching addiction intervention strategies and treatment options. I compiled resources and practiced what I would say. The family reunion began with the usual forced cheer that characterized our gatherings. The first 2 days were a carefully orchestrated performance of the perfect family. Matching t-shirts for the anniversary photo shoot, catered meals served on grandmother's china, carefully edited family stories shared around the fire pit that excluded any mention of Uncle James's difficult times. On the third night, with everyone gathered in the main lodge for dinner, I noticed Uncle James was missing. I found him on the back deck fumbling with something in his pocket. When he saw me, he quickly shoved whatever it was back into his jacket. "Just getting some air, Lillian," he said with an artificial brightness that broke my heart. This man who had once been my hero, who had taught me to skip stones and build sandcastles, was now a hollow shell of himself. And everyone inside was content to watch him disappear as long as he did it quietly. I made my decision in that moment. During dinner, while everyone was seated, and before dessert was served, I stood up and cleared my throat. The table gradually fell silent as all eyes turned to me. "I have something important to say," I began, my voice shaking despite my resolve. "I love everyone in this room, especially you, Uncle James." I turned to face him directly. "And because I love you, I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore, while we all pretend everything is fine." The silence in the room became oppressive. My uncle stared at me with an expression of betrayal, while my father half rose from his chair. "Lillian, this isn't the time or place," he warned. "It never is," I replied. "That's the problem." I turned back to my uncle. "You have an addiction, Uncle James. It nearly killed you 3 months ago, and it's still killing you slowly. And everyone in this family is helping it happen by keeping it secret." The room erupted. My grandmother began to cry. My father was shouting. Aunts and uncles and cousins were all talking at once. But I kept my eyes on Uncle James, who sat perfectly still amidst the chaos, his face a mask of shame and anger. Then my mother stood up, her voice cutting through the noise. "That's enough, Lillian. How dare you ruin your grandparents' celebration with these accusations?" "They're not accusations, Mom. They're facts. Facts we've been hiding for years." What happened next was the betrayal I never saw coming. My mother, her voice cold and controlled, said words that would forever change my relationship with my family. "We've always handled things this way, Lillian. Long before you decided you knew better than the rest of us. If you can't respect how this family operates, perhaps you shouldn't be part of these gatherings." My father nodded in agreement. "This family stands together, Lillian. We don't air our private matters in public. We don't turn on each other." One by one, relatives I had loved and trusted all my life made their positions clear. My aunts and uncles murmured about youthful indiscretion and lack of understanding about family loyalty. Cousins I'd grown up with looked away uncomfortably, but said nothing in my defense. Even Kate, my sister, and once Allie remained silent, though the anguish in her eyes told me she was torn. The family pressure was too strong, the lifetime of conditioning too deep. Only Ryan met my gaze steadily across the table, a sad gratitude in his eyes, for trying to help his father when no one else would. The ultimatum, when it came, was delivered by my father, with the same firm voice he had used to set boundaries throughout my childhood. "Lillian, you have a choice to make. Either you respect this family's privacy and our way of handling our affairs, or you can't be part of them. It's that simple." In that devastating moment, I realized that my family, the people I had loved and trusted my entire life, valued their illusion of perfection over truth. They valued appearances over health. They valued silence over my uncle's life. And they were asking me to make the same choice or lose them all. I don't remember much about leaving the reunion that night. The shock of my family's betrayal had left me numb, moving on autopilot as I packed my bags and called for a rideshare. What I do remember clearly is standing in the driveway waiting for my car and watching through the window as the family gathering continued inside. Drinks being poured, dessert served, conversation resuming, as if my departure was merely a minor disruption rather than the shattering of my entire world. Only Kate followed me outside, tears streaming down her face. "Lil, please don't go like this," she pleaded. "Give everyone time to cool down. You know how Mom and Dad get when they're embarrassed." "This isn't about embarrassment, Kate," I said, my voice hollow. "They had to choose between getting Uncle James help and keeping up appearances. They chose appearances, and they expect me to do the same. They're from a different generation. They don't understand addiction the way you do with your medical background. They understand enough to know he needs help. They just don't want to admit it. I hugged her tightly. I love you, but I can't pretend anymore. I won't. As my car pulled away, I watched Kate standing alone in the driveway, caught between family loyalty and the truth, just as I had been for so many years. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I returned to my apartment in Boston and tried to continue with my normal routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. I called in sick to work for several days, unable to muster the emotional energy to care for sick children, when I could barely care for myself. I ignored calls from family members except for Kate, who left tearful voicemails begging me to reconsider my position. Sleep eluded me as I replayed the confrontation in my mind, questioning whether I could have handled it differently, whether I had truly done the right thing, or simply caused pain for everyone involved. Had I really helped Uncle James? Or had I just alienated myself from everyone I loved? Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket. I began to withdraw from friends' declining invitations and letting messages go unanswered. My apartment, once a source of pride as my first adult home, became a prison of rumination and doubt. When I finally returned to work, my colleagues noticed the change in me. "Are you okay?" they would ask, and I would force a smile and say I was just tired. But inside, I was collapsing. About 3 weeks after the reunion, Ryan called. We agreed to meet at a cafe halfway between Boston and where he lived in Providence. When I saw him, the family resemblance to Uncle James, the same eyes, the same smile, brought a fresh wave of grief. "Dad refused the treatment option," Ryan said without preamble once we'd ordered coffee. "Grandpa called it unnecessary and excessive. Dad's seeing a private doctor who's continuing to prescribe the same medications." My heart sank. So nothing's changed. "One thing's changed," Ryan said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Someone finally said out loud what we've all been pretending not to see for years. That matters, Lil." Through Ryan, I learned that the family narrative about my absence had already been constructed. Apparently, I was going through a phase and had some emotional problems due to stress from work. The family had decided that my intervention attempt was a symptom of my own issues rather than a response to Uncle James's very real addiction. "They're telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown," Ryan said, his disgust evident. Apparently that's easier to admit than the truth about Dad. The realization that my family was actively spreading lies about my mental health to protect their secret felt like a fresh betrayal. It was one thing to disagree with my approach. It was another entirely to discredit me to preserve their denial. As the holiday season approached, I received a carefully worded invitation from my mother to attend Christmas Eve dinner, the first contact from my parents since the reunion. The invitation came with thinly veiled conditions. "We're all ready to move past the unfortunate incident and welcome you back, assuming you've had time to reflect on family priorities." The message was clear: I could return to the fold, but only if I agreed to resume the family charade. Only if I pretended that nothing was wrong with Uncle James. Only if I valued the family image over his health and my own integrity. After days of agonizing, I declined the invitation with a brief message: "I love you all, but I won't pretend anymore. When you're ready to face the truth, I'll be here." Christmas Eve. Usually my favorite night of the year, filled with family traditions and Uncle James's Santa routine, I spent alone in my apartment with takeout Chinese food and a marathon of holiday movies that only intensified my sense of loss. I cried myself to sleep that night, grieving for the family I'd lost by simply telling the truth. The one unexpected bright spot during this dark period came from Anna, a nurse practitioner I worked with at the hospital. She noticed my declining mental state and invited me to lunch one day in January. "You're not yourself, Lillian," she said directly. "You've lost weight, you're withdrawing, and yesterday I saw you crying in the supply closet. What's going on?" Something about her straightforward concern broke through my isolation. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything. Uncle James's addiction, my family's decades of denial, the disastrous intervention, and my current estrangement. Instead of the judgment I feared, Anna nodded with understanding. My brother was an addict for 12 years, she said. My parents did the same thing. Covered for him, made excuses, shut down anyone who tried to help. Family systems around addiction are powerful things. Her validation, the simple acknowledgement that what I had experienced was real and wrong, was the first step toward healing. For the first time since the reunion, I felt seen and heard rather than crazy or disloyal. You did the right thing, Anna told me. Even if it cost you, even if it didn't work. Telling the truth in a family built on secrets takes incredible courage. With Anna's encouragement, I began to see my family dynamics clearly for the first time. I recognized the patterns of enablement that had shaped our interactions for decades. I understood that my parents' definition of family loyalty, maintaining appearances at all costs, was actually a form of collective self-destruction that had hurt all of us, including Uncle James. Most importantly, I realized that standing by my truth didn't make me disloyal. It made me the only one truly loyal to my uncle's well-being, even if he and the rest of the family couldn't see it yet. For 6 long months, my contact with family was limited to occasional text exchanges with Kate and brief strained birthday and holiday calls from my parents that carefully avoided any mention of Uncle James or the reunion incident. My mother would update me on insignificant family news, a cousin's new job, my grandparents' garden renovation, while skillfully navigating around the elephant in the room. I played along during these calls, too exhausted to reopen wounds that clearly weren't ready to heal. Kate tried to maintain our relationship, but even our once close bond was strained by the family rift. She was still living at home while finishing college, caught in the impossible position of loving both me and our parents. "They miss you," she would text. "They just don't know how to reach out without admitting they were wrong." "It's not about being wrong," I would reply. "It's about getting Uncle James help before it's too late." The life-changing news came on an ordinary Tuesday in July. Kate called, her voice tight with emotion. "Uncle James got arrested last night," she said without preamble. "DUI. He had Cousin Emma's kids in the car with him." My blood ran cold. Emma's children were 7 and 5 years old. "Were they hurt?" I asked immediately. "No, thank God. A police officer pulled him over when he was swerving. His blood alcohol was twice the legal limit, and they found prescription pills that weren't his." I closed my eyes, sick with the realization that what I had feared had finally happened. Innocent people, children, had been put at risk by my family's refusal to address Uncle James's addiction. "The kids are fine, just scared," Kate continued. "But Emma is furious. She's threatening to press additional charges and tell the whole extended family everything. Mom and Dad are in crisis mode." Within hours, my phone rang with my father's number, the first direct call from him in months. I answered with trepidation, unsure what to expect. "Lillian," he said, his voice unusually subdued. "We need your help. Your expertise in medical matters would be valuable right now." The realization dawned slowly, then hit me all at once. They didn't want my help to get Uncle James into treatment. They wanted my nursing background to help manage the crisis. Perhaps to find a sympathetic doctor to understand legal medical terms, or worst of all, to convince Emma that the situation wasn't as serious as it seemed. They wanted my help with damage control, not healing. The old Lillian, the one who had been raised to value family loyalty above all else, might have agreed out of a desperate desire to be welcomed back into the fold. But I was no longer that person. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I can help Uncle James get into a proper treatment program. I can help the family understand addiction and how to support recovery. But I won't help cover this up. Not anymore." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When my father finally spoke, his voice was cold. "I see your time away hasn't changed your perspective." "No," I agreed. "It's only strengthened it." That refusal, choosing integrity over reconciliation, was one of the hardest but most important decisions of my life. It was the moment I fully stepped into my own power, breaking free from the dysfunctional patterns that had defined my family for generations. In the aftermath of Uncle James's arrest, I channeled my energy into positive action, rather than rumination. I joined a support group for families affected by addiction, finding solace and strength in the stories of others who had faced similar challenges. The group met every Wednesday evening in a community center basement, a diverse collection of people united by common pain. There was Michael, whose wife's alcoholism had destroyed their marriage; Sophia, struggling with her son's heroin addiction; elderly Mr. Patel, whose daughter had lost her medical license due to prescription drug abuse. In their stories, I recognized echoes of my own experience: the shame, the secrecy, the impossible choices. But I also found hope as they shared strategies for setting boundaries while still offering love. You can't save someone who isn't ready to be saved, the group facilitator Luis told us. But you can save yourself. And sometimes that's what ultimately saves them too. Through this group, I began to build what therapists call a chosen family, a network of supportive relationships based on honesty rather than obligation. Anna from work introduced me to her friends. I reconnected with college roommates I had lost touch with. I volunteered at a recovery center using my nursing skills to help others struggling with addiction. 3 months after the arrest, Ryan called with unexpected news. "Dad's agreed to go to rehab," he said, his voice betraying a cautious optimism. "A 30-day inpatient program. He's checking in tomorrow." "What changed his mind?" I asked, hardly daring to believe it. "The judge gave him an ultimatum: rehab or jail time. And—" Ryan paused. As my network of authentic relationships grew, I found the strength to maintain boundaries with my parents, despite their increasing attempts to draw me back into the family system without addressing the underlying issues. "We've been through a lot as a family," my mother said during a tense phone call. "It's time to put it behind us and move forward." "I agree," I told her. "But moving forward has to include honesty about what happened and what needs to change." "Why can't you just let it go?" she asked, frustration evident in her voice. "Everyone else has." "That's the problem, Mom. Letting it go is what got us here in the first place." The most difficult conversation was yet to come. 6 months after Uncle James entered treatment, my parents requested a meeting. We gathered at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant halfway between Boston and my childhood home. My stomach was in knots as I spotted them waiting at a corner table, looking older and more vulnerable than I remembered. The conversation began awkwardly with surface pleasantries and careful avoidance of difficult topics. But when our meals arrived, my father cleared his throat and addressed what we all knew was the real purpose of our meeting. "Your mother and I have been seeing a family therapist," he said, the admission clearly difficult for him. "At James's request, actually. His counselors suggested it." I set down my fork, surprised. That's good to hear." "The therapist has helped us see some things more clearly," my mother added, "about how we've handled James's addiction." She stumbled over the word but managed to say it, a small but significant step. "We're not saying we agree with how you approach things at the reunion." My father continued, his old defensiveness briefly resurfacing. "But we understand now that you were trying to help, not hurt the family." It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of the harm that had been done, both to Uncle James through enablement and to me through ostracism. But it was a beginning, a small crack in the wall of denial that had defined our family for decades. "I'd like us to find a way forward," I said carefully. "But I can't go back to pretending. I can't be part of keeping secrets that hurt people I love." For the first time, my parents didn't immediately reject this condition. Instead, my mother reached across the table and took my hand, an unusual gesture from a woman who rarely displayed physical affection. "We're learning," she said simply. "It's not easy to change after all these years, but we're trying." 1 year after the disastrous family reunion that had fractured my relationship with my family, my life looked dramatically different. I had moved to a new apartment in a sunnier part of Boston, decorated with plants and artwork that reflected my emerging sense of self rather than family expectations. I had been promoted at work to a leadership position in the pediatric department. Most importantly, I had built a support system of friends who valued honesty and authentic connection. Uncle James was 9 months sober, the longest stretch of sobriety he'd maintained in over 2 decades. After completing his initial treatment program, he had committed to ongoing outpatient therapy, regular AA meetings, and a complete lifestyle change. The transformation in him was remarkable. The shadow that had darkened his features for so long had lifted, revealing glimpses of the warm, engaged uncle I remembered from my childhood. Our relationship had been carefully rebuilt on new foundations of honesty. During his 3rd month of sobriety, he had formally made amends to me as part of his 12-step work. "I failed you as an uncle," he said during a long walk along the Charles River. "You deserved an adult you could trust, and instead I taught you that it was okay to lie to protect people's feelings. I put my addiction before your well-being, and I let the family blame you for trying to help me. I am deeply sorry, Lillian." Hearing those words, a clear acknowledgement of harm rather than the deflection and minimization I had grown accustomed to from my family, was profoundly healing. It validated that my experiences had been real, my pain justified, and my actions motivated by love rather than disloyalty. "I forgive you," I told him, meaning it, "and I'm so proud of the work you're doing now." My parents' journey toward greater authenticity was moving more slowly, but progress was happening. The family therapist they had begun seeing had helped them recognize patterns of dysfunction that extended back to their own childhoods. My father's experiences growing up with an alcoholic mother that had never been acknowledged, my mother's family history of maintaining appearances at all costs. It's like discovering that the blueprint you've been building your life from was flawed from the beginning, my mother explained during one of our now regular Sunday phone calls. "We thought we were protecting everyone, but we were actually hurting you all." These realizations had led to tentative but meaningful changes. My parents had attended several Al-Anon meetings connecting with other families dealing with addiction. They had begun to use words like enabling and codependency, terms that would have been unthinkable in our family lexicon a year earlier. The most surprising change came from my grandparents. After initial resistance, they had gradually come to accept Uncle James's addiction as a medical condition requiring treatment, rather than a moral failing to be hidden. My grandmother, who had once been the fiercest defender of family privacy, now volunteered weekly at a women's recovery center, knitting blankets for residents and their children. Kate and I had fully reconciled our bond stronger for having weathered the family storm. She had moved into her own apartment after graduation and was establishing healthy boundaries with our parents, something she credited me with teaching her. "You showed me it's possible to love people while still standing in your truth," she told me during a sister's weekend in New York. "I don't think I would have had the courage to live my own life if you hadn't shown me how." Family therapy sessions, which now occasionally included me, revealed that the patterns of secret-keeping extended back generations in the Williams family. My grandfather's brother, it turned out, had also struggled with alcoholism in the 1950s, but had been sent to rest at a distant relative's farm whenever his condition became too obvious to hide. My grandmother's sister had suffered from depression that was never acknowledged or treated. Generation after generation, the family had chosen silence over health, appearance over authenticity. Breaking these patterns wasn't easy. There were still difficult moments. Holiday gatherings where tensions rose, conversations that ended abruptly when painful topics emerged, occasional relapses into old communication habits. But the difference was that now these moments were acknowledged rather than ignored. The elephant in the room had been named, and while it hadn't left entirely, at least we weren't all pretending it wasn't there. My work with other families dealing with addiction became an unexpected source of healing and purpose. I began volunteering at a family support program connected to the hospital, using my personal experience and nursing background to help others navigate the complex emotions and systems involved in addiction recovery. "You have a gift for this," the program director told me after watching me lead a session. "You understand both the medical aspects and the family dynamics in a way most professionals don't." This work led me to pursue additional certification in addiction counseling, adding specialized skills to my nursing practice. What had once been the most painful experience of my life was gradually transforming into a source of wisdom and compassion that could help others. The most profound change, though, was in how I approached all my relationships. I had learned to value honesty over comfort, authenticity over harmony, and health over appearance. I had discovered that real loyalty sometimes meant saying the difficult truth rather than maintaining a comfortable lie. In my friendships, my dating life, and even my professional relationships, I now established clear boundaries around honesty and transparency. I don't do secrets or unspoken expectations became my personal policy. This clarity sometimes meant connections ended early, but the relationships that remained were deeper and more genuine than anything I had experienced before. My journey toward healing wasn't linear. There were still days when grief would overtake me unexpectedly, mourning not just for the year of family connection I had lost, but for the childhood that had been shaped around secrets I hadn't understood. There were moments of anger when I remembered how I had been vilified for simply trying to help someone I loved. There were lingering trust issues that sometimes made me question others' motives or hold people at a distance. But through therapy support groups and the steady practice of honest living, these wounds were gradually healing. I was learning to trust again, not with the blind faith of my childhood, but with the wise discernment of someone who had seen how trust could be both given and betrayed. The family gathering that marked the one-year anniversary of our rift was a subdued dinner at my parents' house rather than a large reunion. Uncle James was there, as were Kate and Ryan. My grandparents joined briefly for dessert. The conversation was sometimes awkward, occasionally tense, but fundamentally different from the performances that had characterized our gatherings in the past. When Uncle James quietly declined a glass of wine, no one pretended not to notice or rushed to change the subject. When my grandmother mentioned a friend whose son was having problems similar to James's, my father didn't shut down the conversation with a sharp look or change of subject. When I mentioned my volunteer work with addiction support groups, my mother asked genuine questions rather than steering the conversation to safer territory. These small moments of authenticity, though they might seem insignificant to an outsider, represented revolutionary change in our family system. The perfect facade had cracked, allowing real connection to begin growing through the fissures. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey of the past year. From devastating betrayal, to cautious healing from isolation, to new connection from silence to truth. It hadn't been easy, and the path forward would still hold challenges. But I had learned perhaps the most important lesson of my life, that truth, however painful, is ultimately more healing than the most comfortable lie. I had also discovered a strength in myself that I never knew existed, the courage to stand alone when necessary, to hold firm to my values, even when it cost me to rebuild my life on foundations of authenticity rather than appearance. My family was healing not because we had managed to paper over our differences or return to our old patterns, but precisely because we had been willing to face painful truths together. Uncle James was sober because he had finally received the help he had needed for decades. My parents were growing because they had been willing to question beliefs they had held their entire lives. And I had found my voice because I had been forced to decide what I truly valued. The hardest truth I had to face in this journey was that sometimes love means risking rejection. Sometimes loyalty means saying what no one wants to hear. Sometimes the most caring action is the one that causes the most immediate pain. But I've also learned that truth spoken with love and held with conviction creates the possibility for deeper healing and connection than silence ever could. And that is a lesson worth any price. If you've ever had to stand alone for a truth that others weren't ready to hear, I hope my story gives you courage. Sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. Sometimes, what looks like disloyalty is actually the deepest form of love. If my journey has resonated with you, please share your own experiences in the comments below. Hit the like button if you found value in my story. Subscribe for more authentic conversations about family healing, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in choosing truth over comfort. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your truth matters even when it's not what others want to hear.